Hey everyone, in this video, we are going to be breaking down one of the most controversial and polarizing upcoming airdrops that we have coming up next week, June 26th. It's all things Blast by Pac-Man. I'm going to be joined by Bread Guy in just a second. He's someone that's been very analytical, very in the weeds, and has been tracking various metrics on all things Blast, and he's got some great predictions. We're also going to talk about what might happen after the airdrop, if Blast has any staying power and potential ways to trade it. Let's get into it. So you've been tweeting a fair amount about Blast recently. This week, you shared the prediction that you think Blast FDV could kick off at $10 billion, which is, I believe, over expectations. If I had to put a number on it compared to what the sentiment and temperature change seems to be like right now. You talked about various metrics that you're using to come up with that prediction. Can you give a TLDR on kind of how you're thinking about Blast and how you came up with that $10 billion number?
Yeah. Honestly, it was just people have been throwing around numbers, and I was trying to see if there was any basis that we could arrive at those numbers based on usage of the actual chain. So like on-chain metrics, user information, active addresses, whatever. Because a lot of stuff is based on the percentages of token allocation. Anyways, I ran a little comp against all L2s because this ecosystem likes to comp stuff, and said, okay, is there anything that correlates between on-chain metrics and FDVs of current tokens? So Arbitrum, Optimism, whatever. So I did that, stacked it up against those chains, and saw that, well, there is a little bit of a correlation when it comes to the fees paid by the users of the chain. It's like activity, right? Activity does have a loose correlation there. And when running those numbers against what Blast is generating right now, you can actually see that, yeah, so right there. And I did it. You can see, on the right, FDV is of the actual token, correlates to as the fees of the chain go up on a 7-day moving average. It's typically, they both go up simultaneously, right? It's kind of proportional. So I said, okay, cool. We have that. We can see there's a little bit of a correlation, and it fits with my mental model. Optimism, Arbitrum, biggest chains out there. ZK Sync, Mantle, which ZK Sync just dropped. There was a correlation. So I said, okay, what if we took the fees that Blast is generating right now, we applied that to this to make it look like it was in line. So I did that, and you can see Blast, if you look at the fees that it actually generates, it's much higher. So I think it's the second image that I have. You can see, yeah, there you go. So Blast, if you go based on the fees that Blast generates, the users actually pay, it's actually much more than Optimism or Arbitrum. Now there's some nuances there. There's a premium in those things, and there actually is no correlation between, like, there's no structural connection between fees and the price of these tokens because they're governance tokens. But if you use this as a heuristic, you can see that Blast could justify, at least based on how the market seems to be justifying prices of these things, 10 to 12 billion FDV. I put it at 12 there, and it looks comfortable in that chart. So I kind of use that to see if we could back into a number that made sense.
Absolutely. And then can you walk us through the rest of the kind of metrics that you were tracking? I see ecosystem growth is kind of what you walked through next.
Yeah, so that was just like, all right, this is based on the number of protocols that are actually existing inside of those ecosystems. You can see it's kind of scattered all over the place. And the size of the logos in this is scaled to the rate of growth of the actual ecosystem. So you can see Blast is growing quickly for the time that it's been around. This logo there is bigger than Mode, it's bigger than Manta, it's bigger than Mantle down in those corners. That's why the logo is bigger than everything else. And then you can see, like, is there a correlation between how old it's been versus the amount of protocols that they have? And that was just a way to show that Blast, while it's young and it's small relative to the number of protocols it has, like in the grand scheme of things, like a mature ecosystem like Arbitrum, Optimism, it's actually got a shit ton of protocols, and it's growing faster than pretty much everything else in the ecosystem. A good indication that it wasn't hollow because there was actual builders and pipe being laid there, frankly.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to cover here is you did the token FDV for basically compared to a bunch of different metrics. Did you have any takeaways by kind of running these numbers on the 6 different kind of metrics that you were looking at?
Yeah, just that most of it was worthless, right? Everyone uses TVL as like the quick, and TVL in this one is the top right. TVL is the thing everyone looks at today, like, oh, this thing has a bunch of money on it, therefore the token's worth a lot. But if you see there, the correlation between the amount that's locked in the chain and the value of the token, and this is the same I use for everything, there's no clean correlation between the two, right? Like, as TVL goes up, you don't necessarily get a high valuation in the actual chain. When you go to the bottom right of that graphic, you can see it's much closer. You can actually see a bit of a trend coming out of it, right? There seems to be a connection there, where as these two things grow together or grow, it's proportionately going up. And the very last chart I threw in this was, or I think maybe it was in the comment, you could see it even extends beyond L2s. I included Solana, Base, and Ethereum, and you can see that thing keeps going. So that was just pulling in a bunch of metrics to see, yeah. So you can see that using fees to total value locked, even beyond the ecosystem of L2s, this correlation seems to exist, right? As usage happens, as fees are paid by users, valuation of the thing tends to go up. So that was just to give it another bullet point that, hey, maybe this thing is actually has legs to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the counter example that we've been seeing, right? The counter take on Blast in general has been that most of the users, most of the people that are paying these fees aren't real users. And it's hard to quantify at the end of the day what a real user is and if someone's a farmer versus not a farmer. But that's been the main counter argument I've seen against Blast is like, hey, this is kind of just like a Ponzi chain that people are using to farm this upcoming airdrop. I know you talked a little bit about this. Can you share your perspective on Blast as a real, does it have real users versus just farmers?
So that question is more of like it's hard to prove a negative situation. I wrote that thread on it. And in that, what I did was no one's farming Arbitrum right now, right? No one's farming optimism right now. So I said, okay, is there anything that I can look at to see that the way that Blast is behaving is wildly different? The user's behavior is wildly different than all of the normal quote unquote chains. So like I created this, and this is just based on a few metrics. So like this one in particular is like for the amount of TVL that's on there, like how much our users actually, like I just wanted to make sure that Blast wasn't an outlier based on a lot of these metrics. So Blast is sitting squarely in the middle, Optimism, Base, Arbitrum, they're all right there. But you see Linear, Mode, ZK Sync, wildly outside of the range. So like this is the average asset per user on that bottom axis, our bottom axis. The other one is work per TVL dollar. That's like fees paid per TVL dollar. And you can see that, yeah, there's like something weird going on there because they're so wildly different than the cluster of everyone else. And Blast is not that. Good indication, right? It's not definitive, but it's a good indication. Same thing with that next one. You have the active adapters, quality of them. Same thing. I just kind of try to create like some bands to say what is normal here and is Blast outside of normal. And based on the sentiment that I'm seeing with a lot of like on-chain, or not on-chain, but on the timeline, leads me to believe that they're fairly organic users. There's probably some farming. There definitely is farming going on, not hollow farming like you see in some of these ecosystems.
Yeah. And the reason why I love what you're doing, Brett, is obviously there's people have theories of what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And it's fun to talk about. But what I like about what you do for people watching this is you actually have like a real analytical, take a data-backed approach to addressing a lot of these concerns. But when now using this data to build a thesis for like maybe how you're planning as a trader to try to play this Blast game. Obviously, I know you've been active in a lot of these dApps and have been trying to accumulate as much gold as possible. But I guess in general, have you thought through your strategy for how this airdrop may play out on June 26th? Whether it's how much you're planning on taking profits, if you feel like there's going to be more momentum coming into it, how Pac-Man might play this out. Any thoughts on that aspect in general when we see this airdrop? I'm assuming is going to happen still on June 26th.
Yeah, I know MO is to just announce at very last second that, hey, it's coming live. So we won't know until the last moment. Honestly, in this PvP environment, you have to expect everything is launched and then goes down only for a little bit shortly after everyone sells. Like, I don't know why Blast would buck that trend. I also think we'd be naive to think that Pac-Man wouldn't have some sort of mechanism in place for people to incentivize them to stay. I don't think it'll be enough to stop everyone from selling and get out. And I myself plan on, I think I'm going to be very tax conscious on this one. We're just like, all right, I know I want to capture my tax obligations right up front. I'll do that. And then I'll probably let the rest ride because based on the numbers I'm seeing, it's an ecosystem I want to continue to have exposure to. So I want to make sure that I leave stuff there, and I don't need all the money now. So I want to make sure I could just sit on something and let the rest of the ecosystem develop and ride that out.
What is it about Blast as an ecosystem that gets you excited about its long-term viability?
So the users and that protocol growth stuff that we had in that last graphic or 2 graphics ago, whenever that was, because that's sticky, right? Like if you have apps being built there, you have infrastructure being laid, you have users staying there, that's all incentive for those people to continue to further the ecosystem, right? I have bags over there. My job is over there. All of those things, it's much stickier than some of these more passive farms, right? Like layer 0 dropped today and everyone's just like, all right, why would you ever need to hold on to this token? There's no like ecosystem. There's nothing holding you there. It's just something that you use in the background. Whereas when you're involved with Blast, he's really good at having the next carrot. So I think he'll continue to do that. And yeah, I want to have exposure to it.
Got it. And within Blast as a whole, there's obviously the other unknowns that we're still figuring out, right? There's what's Blur going to be, Blur's in interaction with it, and NFTs as a whole is going to be an interesting carrot. He also said that, and I'm referring to him as Pac-Man, that there's going to be very interesting incentives coming for teams to come over to Blast. And that feels like that's been his goal and his strategy, is how to get builders and founders and teams over to Blast and kind of help them grow. And then the users kind of will follow. So we'll see how that happens. I think there's a lot of cards up Pac-Man's sleeve that he's not really revealing right now. It's hard for me personally, like, figure out kind of how I want to place until I think we learn a little bit more, which has been interesting on it. Obviously, you've been pretty bullish on kind of some of the dApps on Blast, some of the things you can use and do on Blast in general. But I guess bigger picture, right? Before we wrap, is there anything else that you find particularly interesting on Blast, or maybe some assumptions that the broader ecosystem is making right now that you feel isn't kind of being accounted for, isn't being talked about enough in Blast?
So I'm constantly surprised by how much people are triggered by and or latching onto the native yield of the chain. Like, it's a very simple thing, and it's not really an innovative thing, but it is because it's a structural thing in the ecosystem. It lets a lot of people assume that, because yield on stablecoins, yield on that, all those products have been available in DeFi products this entire time. And there's been some people who have done some stuff, but the fact that by default in that ecosystem, a lot of creators have had a switch turned on, makes them creative, thinking of new products, doing unique things. And that's interesting to me, because it's the only one that has that, right? So that means it's novel. Awesome. That's good indication for the future. And then the second thing is, I still think Blast kind of gets a bad rap with the old ETH heads, which makes me think that it'll have like this hated rally of, like, the class of 2021 has followed Pac-Man. He's been their shepherd across the bridge C to go from the L1, which everyone has to get off the L1, to a designated L2, but base has been the other big one. And yeah, I think people from the class of 2021 will feel comfortable there, and it'll continue to move up into the right. And again, that hated rally, I think, would be classic. Everyone, all the old heads won't like it because it's not aligned, quote unquote.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you covering that. Look, that's going to be the long and short of this video. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to get the Blast TG, will be happening on June 26th. We're assuming a lot of assumptions there could change. But if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed what Bread Guy was saying, you can follow him at OX Bread Guy on Twitter, on X, and get more in-depth information on all these charts, all this very thoughtful analysis that he's doing. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to our channel. Drop us a comment. You can also check out the Daily Bone podcast, is a daily live crypto show from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern every single weekday. Thank you guys for tuning in.